Welcome to A Call to Healing. I'm your host, Melanie McDaniel. Each week, we enter conversations that reveal new dimensions of what it means to heal emotionally, somatically, and spiritually. Today's guest is Rami Abu-Sitta, a shamanic practitioner, energy medicine teacher, and artist who walks the path of integrating spiritual awakening, chronic illness, shadow work, and creative expression. He guides people to reclaim their full authentic selves without losing the playfulness or humanity along the way. A Call to Healing is sponsored by Senavida, a platform helping practitioners spend more time in service and less time in the back office. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Rami, welcome to A Call to Healing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, Rami, is it Abu-Sitta? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I mean, that's incorrect, but you could pronounce it that way.
How do you pronounce it?
I'm just kidding. It's Abu-Sitta.
Oh, Abu-Sitta.
You know, I like when people say Abu-Sitta because I do follow Hinduism just casually, and Ram and Sita are the masculine and feminine forces. So I think I carry both of those, but it is Rami Abu-Sitta.
Beautiful. Okay, so I know of you as a shaman, but I want to hear who you were before and how you got to where you are. So could you give me a little background history, whatever you want to share about yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of at the halfway point in my life where for half of my life I've been following this shamanic path, and up until I was 18, I mean that's when I shifted and had my sort of spiritual awakening slash Kundalini psychosis, and yeah, I mean I've always been an artist, and if I'm being honest, at a certain point when I really went deep on the healing work, I started to drift a little bit further away from my inner artist, inner musician. And so in the past few years, my path has really been about integrating those two pieces of my psyche back together. You want to know about my life until I was 18? I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Go Bills.
Go Bills.
In the suburbs of Buffalo. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of reflections around me from the new age or from alternative spiritual paths. And I was also raised without religion. So I was raised to figure out my connection to God or divinity or whatever it meant for me without it being forced upon me. I'm grateful for that. Yeah, my mom was raised Catholic. My dad was raised Muslim. So they raised us without.
It's amazing. I almost feel like that's a blessing for real because I was really set back with religion.
Yeah, I mean, people have that experience, and I know other people in my position that like wish they had more structure. And I think, the individual soul wants what they want, and I'm grateful that I didn't have to like unlearn anything that I felt forced upon me or programmed into, besides all the cultural programming that we've all been.
I'm going to ask you about the psychosis part. I only want you to share what you feel comfortable with, but that was kind of the launch into your becoming spiritual shaman, right? Like it seems like it's an important piece of your story, but I only want you to share what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and we spoke a little bit before we stepped into this podcast, and I mentioned how in these interviews I feel like sometimes it's my role to rip my chest open and smash my heart on the table. And
No need.
I'm grateful that I'm able to do that. And a big piece for me with walking a spiritual path is about the lived experience, right? I can talk about these things in the form of metaphor or, some story that I heard from some yogi long ago or some shaman in the Amazon, but it's not my personal experience. My personal experience is growing up in a mixed race family in Buffalo, New York, and getting sick when I was 17 years old. So it didn't start with this awakening psychosis. It started with a physical illness, a really crippling physical illness that it appeared as chronic pain from repetitive guitar playing, because that was the path I saw forward for myself when I was 17 years old and gearing up for college. I wanted to be a professional musician. I also had a lot of self-doubt surrounding that. I think I was I was around a lot of musicians who I felt were better than me and had more experience and started at a younger age. And perhaps because of that insecurity, I ignored the signals from my body and I continued to play and practice for 8 to 10 hours a day sometimes. And then I developed tendinitis. And it's like, okay, just tendinitis. It's a signal from the body. Rest. Let your body rest. Don't do too much with your hands that week. I'd had this before and I'd rested and it had healed itself. It would only take about a week and it would go away. And then, God knows, I think maybe by the time I die, I'll figure it out. I have my theories, but the pain spread throughout my body. I got this weird flu at the same time. I went to see the doctor. I don't know if there was some sort of medical intervention that I can't remember, but I got the flu. And I noticed that over the course of the next weeks, the pain didn't go away. And in fact, it started to affect my other hand. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just overcompensating. Now I'm using my left hand to write and do all these things that I would normally use my right hand for, and starting to feel sore. And then the symptoms progressed and progressed until I couldn't really stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. By the end of my senior year in high school, I needed a scribe to visit all of my classes with me, to dictate all of my notes. I did all my final exams for high school verbally. I spoke them out loud, my final essays. And when you are an artist, your hands are usually how you communicate with the world. Your hands, they're connected to the heart. They're how we express ourselves. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who lose their ability to use their hands. It's a special kind of hell for an artist, especially an artist like me who at the age of 17, 18, that was how I alchemized my emotions. That was how I would have a rough day at school, or I'd be processing something or a breakup or whatever. And I could very tangibly pick up my guitar for 15 minutes and improvise, crank my amp. And by the end of that 15, 20 minutes of playing, I would feel so much better. It may start as sad music because that's what I'm feeling, or angry. And then it would evolve into something melodic and sweet by the end. And it would mirror my emotional state. So before I ever learned meditation, that was my way of meditating. And, if I'm viewing it from the stance of a victim and all these things are happening to me, then I felt at the time that my abilities were being stripped away from me. My freedom was taken away from me. My ability to regulate my nervous system, to share my heart with the world. I heard recently an artist share that that artists typically are terrible communicators, and that's why they're so good at art, is because they're scared to speak a lot of the time, speak what's on their mind. And so they've found this channel through painting or through music. And so I was forced to learn these other ways of regulating my nervous system. So I started to meditate. This was before any sort of big spiritual awakening, but it was, my way of sort of pain management. Okay, I don't have any control. Let me learn how to breathe. I was starting to get migraines and things like that. And then one night I had a very spooky experience when I was 18 years old of seeing an entity in my bedroom levitating above my bed. And I ran to turn the lights on, and there was all sorts of wild things. We could fill up an hour and a half with just that story. But in essence, it woke me up overnight. Wow. Woke me up to the possibility that there was a lot more going on than I was normally perceiving with my senses. And there are still a lot of things to this day that I'll never be able to explain away with logic or science. However, what happened over the course of the next 2 weeks was that, one, I was able to manifest things really quickly. And I started to step into a pretty sensitive state, psychologically speaking. So I have, the world around me mirroring this experience back to me. I'm able to manifest things quickly. We've all experienced moments of synchronicity, but when you start to step between worlds, the amount of synchronicity that you experience, it really starts to feel like you're tight on a tightrope. On one side is madness, on the other side is enlightenment. And as Joseph Campbell said, the mystic swims in the same waters that the schizophrenic drowns in, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so I was very much dancing between these worlds. I felt very clearly with all of my being that I was remembering a part of myself that had shut down at a really young age. And I don't think it was any accident that I was nearing the window of finally graduating from public school, from the system. I was kind of at the point where I was about to finish doing my time, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And right as I was finishing up my senior year of high school, right after I finished it, I had this awakening experience. And then I was hospitalized. I was in the psych ward for 2 weeks. It was almost like as I crossed that threshold into the psych ward, this voice said, "Oh, you thought you were crazy before? This is going to be the perfect container for you to completely let all of that just spill out of your consciousness." So it turned into basically like a living lucid dream. You know, what happens in that state for many people who experience something similar is your sleep starts to really suffer. So you're not sleeping as much. And then it's almost like your dreams and your waking life become blended together. So I had days where I was Jesus. I had days where everyone around me was an extraterrestrial. I had days where I tried to walk through walls and communicate with the TV. And so I really lost it. And I developed a ton of compassion for the other souls that I saw there walking those halls of the psychiatric hospital. And I saw all those people as special. And it broke my heart to see what was available for them. To be locked away in a space with fluorescent lights and bars on the windows, without access to the outdoors. People who are deeply sensitive to energy, deeply emotionally intelligent, but also struggling with madness. You know, for me, I was blessed to just have this experience, to have this taste, and then never really struggle with severe mental illness or the need to be medicated or any sort of diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I got out of the psych ward and the doctor said this must have been an adverse reaction to one of the medications that we had given you. So I was like, all right, I guess. And again, I think it's like with the perfect storm of developing this weird chronic illness that no doctor could figure out. And then having this sort of awakening spiritual psychosis that was just a random reaction to some medication and without it ever being pinpointed. Mm-hmm. You know, for me on the spiritual level, it was blatant. When I was 18 years old, I picked up my first book on shamanism, and it perfectly mirrored back to me everything that I automatically remembered when I had that experience. That we are deeply interconnected with all of life, that there is a lot going on outside of what we can see and perceive with our eyes and our ears and our sense of smell and all that. And that if you truly want healing, you're going to have to travel beyond just what you can see. That you're not going to really solve the problem at the same level of consciousness that manifested the problem. And then so I started exploring energy work and shamanic healing. And I was nearly bedridden for like 4 or 5 years. I was out of commission, and it forced me to learn everything I possibly could about self-healing. And I deeply was convinced that I'd gotten sick so I could learn how to heal myself from the inside out. And that once I did that, I could start to hold space for other people.
Beautiful. How are you feeling? Do you feel like you got punched in the heart? Are you feeling okay?
No, it's okay. I feel great. Okay. I mean,
yeah,
it's all a story anyways, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful. My understanding is that in Western culture, we hospitalize people who are going through quote unquote psychosis, but some of the indigenous traditions, they see them as special and actually provide a lot more support and help with them. Of course, I'm not speaking from first person experience here, but that's my understanding. Maybe with your shamanism work, and we'll talk about like your path because you've been through a lot of study and training. Is that true? Have you come across that in like the Indian traditions that people in psychosis in the indigenous traditions are seen as special, non-Western cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of studies surrounding that. Different researchers and anthropologists who have journeyed to different shamanic villages where there is a medicine person, and they ask them their story. Oh, how'd you decide, like becoming a doctor or a priest or whatever? How'd you decide you wanted to do this? And more often than not, you'll hear stories of, well, I started hearing voices when I was 17 years old, or I started developing this physical condition and nothing could treat it. And then I kind of slipped into madness. And, in many of these cultures that have preserved their traditions, that haven't been maybe broken apart by the conquest or colonized early on, the ones that still preserved it, yeah, they would usually be directed towards an elder or towards a group of elders that had also been through a similar thing. And they would sit with this person in this very sensitive state of consciousness. And, in our culture, it's all about speed, right? And efficiency. And we have this medical industrial complex that wants to complete these tasks very quickly. And so you can be medicated and brought back into our consensus reality pretty quickly. What a beautiful gift that is. Now, in these indigenous cultures, it would take a lot longer, I believe, and I've seen people approach their experiences in a similar way. Okay, let me try to do this naturally. Let me find a place where I can go in nature, but supported by friends or family, and let this run its course. And, sometimes people are in that state of consciousness for a year, really slipping in and out of psychosis. And there's been different iterations of my journey where I've resented or been bitter about the path that, I agreed to go to the psych ward, but my family definitely pushed it. And if I'm being honest, there are times where I resented them and was upset about it until I started having clients who would come to me in a similar state of consciousness. And there was one moment in particular where I was looking at in someone's eyes and their conviction of what they thought was happening. And what they thought was happening involved me. So I knew that I wasn't, okay. I always take little digital winks as a sign to check in with what I'm sharing. And I am not going to go too deeply into that story. What I want to say is that I have so much compassion for families who are witnessing a family member go through something like this. And it breaks my heart that our culture isn't set up in a way where there are safe alternatives. Now, there are people who have made it their mission to, buy a farm and try to create some way of helping people who are struggling with mental illness or this sort of spiritual psychosis experience. These people need an incredible amount of support and really like 24-hour monitoring. That's just not available. And so in our culture, we have hospitals to put people in. I'm grateful that I was able to have this taste. I'm grateful that it didn't last more than a month or two and that I was able to come back, but it gave me years of work to integrate that experience. And many years later, when I started more formally working with plant medicines with shamans, I saw that my body had basically produced ayahuasca. My brain chemistry basically produced a very high-powered psychedelic experience for me. And so I was able every day to be in that state of consciousness and learn a ton about it. If you can imagine how long it would take you to integrate a month-long ayahuasca ceremony, it would take years, right? I mean, even just one night of ayahuasca, I think, can take years to integrate.
Why do you say ayahuasca and not just DMT? Or is it
Yeah.
just a relational thing, or to put it on the map? Or do you truly feel like it was the spirit of ayahuasca?
No, no. I mean, I think it was biochemical, and if anything, I think as I'm not a neuroscientist, but as I've explored these things lightly, it seems that people going through these experiences have these incredible like dopamine dumps in their brain and other neurochemicals that through the sleep deprivation and everything else that's happening, um, it's like this motor starts running inside of your neurochemistry, and you get these dumps of chemicals that you've never experienced that quantity of in your life. Bordering what feels like and what felt like for me at times like a near death experience. I very clearly remember the moment of experiencing my own death.
With your own chemistry, your own
Yeah,
biochemistry. Wow.
in the
Can you
psych ward.
control that now? Is this something that you have the ability to, if you wanted to sit down and produce DMT or whatever, can you do that in meditation or something?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that is what I learned when I started going through my formal shamanic training is how do you turn this on and off? Now, I'm not going to be able to spontaneously turn on like a near death experience, but I am going to be able to use what I learned through that experience and open my consciousness and open my psychic senses. Um, I'm grateful that they're not on all the time.
Right.
And so, like, for shamans, you may see shamans use rattles a lot or drums. And part of that is it's a very simple way to shift our state of consciousness. So you can use that repetitive rhythm. You see different shamanic traditions where they do like trance dancing around a fire. There's music involved, ceremony. And so we start to access this other part of the brain, um, which I believe is essential for all of us to really integrate ceremony into our lives. And while people get a ton out of plant medicine use, I think a lot of what they get from these ceremonies is the ritual itself, is
Hmm.
the sacred experience itself. Because if you don't resonate with going to a church or a temple or some, organized house of worship, uh, it doesn't mean that you don't need it. I think we really need sacred experiences. It's been part of all of our ancestry and lineage, and it speaks to all of our DNA. So, part of my practice is about creating those spaces so that we can turn on and turn off, um, and access those altered states of consciousness in a safe way.
Beautiful. Can we go into the part of the story where you started down your shamanic path, how you found your teachers, what's the lineage, what are kind of the tools, just like an overview of your path to being a shaman?
I picked up a book by Alberto Vialdo called Shaman Healer Sage. And then I started receiving sessions from someone that he had trained. Yeah, and then that became my goal, get well enough so that I could start going to these retreats, so that I could journey to Peru and work with this lineage, which is, a lot of the teachings came from the Caro lineage in the high Andes of Peru. A lineage that had lived in isolation for over 500 years and at such a high elevation that they didn't work with any plant medicines. It's quite likely that they used to, but because of the conquest and because of their desire to preserve these wisdom teachings, these descendants, the last descendants of the Inca, they journeyed higher and higher into the Andes Mountains. So it wasn't until the 1950s that they actually chose to start descending from the mountains and begin sharing their wisdom teachings, because their prophecy said that the world was entering a place of turmoil and that humans were also finally ready to start to integrate this wisdom into their life. People ask me if I'm a shaman and what kind of medicines I work with. And I create a clear distinction. While I do appreciate the medicine work, a lot of my training and a lot of my work is about working with these indigenous, really psychic healers that work with the luminous energy field that surrounds the physical body. And the idea that when we experience trauma in our lives, or even if it's the inherited trauma of our ancestors that we carry, that can be accessed and transformed and healed by working directly with the energy field that surrounds and informs the physical body.
And you call this shamanic energy medicine? Is that
Yeah.
the term?
Yeah, it's a good all-encompassing term. There's also a lot of soul retrieval work that I've been expanding on in the last few years, which is based on the concept that when you experience a traumatic event in your life, it's almost as if a piece of your life force energy can fragment off of you. So it may be a soul part that's still 7 years old and still kind of stuck in time. People talk about traumatic experiences and how they have disassociated during those experiences, even perhaps witnessed their own body experiencing that trauma, or these moments where they feel like they were never quite the same after a certain experience happened. And so through shifting our state of consciousness with drum and breath work and guided journey work, which is like a shamanic guided meditation, we can access these subconscious planes within our own psyche and start to do integration work to call these pieces back home. On the surface, it may be like, seem obvious. I want all my pieces back. I want to be whole. I want to be a full spectrum human. However, these pieces generally carry some burdens that need to be released too. They left so they could protect you. It's a self-protection mechanism that works really well to get through a very challenging chapter of your life. So I work with people to basically integrate these different parts of themselves back into their life so that they're not just walking a spiritual path and becoming a spiritual person, but really a full spectrum human where they can communicate with these different aspects of themselves, listen to their wisdom, and then bring that wisdom and that medicine, that magic back into their life.
And I think you work with IFS, so more of a Western therapeutic model, but it sounds, when we're talking about parts, it's similar in the same vein. You use that with the energy medicine and this Western way of parts.
Definitely. Yeah, I've learned a lot from IFS in the past few years and blended it with my shamanic training. So I call it shamanic parts work. Because the thing that starts to happen when we start to access these parts, there's a lot happening on the spiritual plane too. So just because we perceive something in one of these states of consciousness, so you may find a soul part, you may find something else that's actually not really you. Something that is maybe a form of kind of psychological armor. Sometimes I call them an inner protector, an inner judge, an inner saboteur. These, if you have a challenging childhood, you're usually going to develop some sort of mechanism to get through that experience. And now, as an adult, it may be showing up in your relationships. It may be showing up as you try to start a business, as you try to break free of this ancestral programming. Like, your ancestors may have struggled with money, or they may have struggled with health, or they may have struggled with alcoholism. And as you try to break these patterns in your life, you may find a lot of resistance. And so through shamanic parts work, soul retrieval work, we can start to access and give voice to these narratives that have been running in the background of our lives. so much healing happens simply through witnessing. And there's all these fancy modalities, and as I talk about energy, and it starts to sound kind of magical and mystical. But the truth is that so much of our pain is caused by suppression. It's just caused by running away, by avoiding, by trying not to look at what we're actually feeling, what we're actually thinking. And, it really breaks apart this model that we are this just singular consciousness. We are just this one person, just this one soul. As you start to dive deeper into your own inner landscape, what you find is that there are actually many different voices inside of you. There's a little 7-year-old, there's an inner artist, there's an inner protector, there's a warrior. And you can feel these things come online at different points in your life as well.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. So is this something you've created? Like, you're in Austin, and you're not always in Austin. You came back to Austin. But for people listening, if they're interested in this work, is this like a common modality? Can they find, like, how do people find this, tap into this, learn about this? Or is this your creation that's relatively new?
Yeah, I mean, my training is deeply, rooted in these ancient practices that have been passed down generally through oral tradition. I've been lucky enough to train with these indigenous elders from Peru. However, the thing with healing work that I've remembered over the years is that it really is an art form. That we can get locked in this kind of hyper scientific, rigid, materialistic view and forget that we as individuals are meant to be part of the evolution of the healing world. So, as I've kind of integrated my inner artist with my inner healer, I've remembered to bring more and more of these different modalities together. I created a school called the School of Shamanic Artistry, and I guide people through a medicine wheel program where, yes, they learn all these tools, but also they go on this deep journey of self-healing, because in order to really be a good facilitator, so much of it is about knowing yourself on the deepest level so that you don't end up projecting that onto your clients, trying to fix yourself through your clients, as happens a lot of time. A lot of people rush into healing work. They have one profound peak experience, whether that's through a ceremony or through something spontaneous, and then they immediately want to help other people. And in many of these indigenous cultures, you would go through these rites of passage and these initiations to make sure that you weren't bringing too much of your own shit into sacred space when you're holding a container for another person. So yes, deeply rooted in tradition, but also I get bored when I don't want to just regurgitate, what I learned from my teachers. So as I've held space for others, and I've been doing this as my, profession, my career for over 10 years now, and it's wanted to evolve, to become more of my own thing. And what I teach other people is, a foundation, so they can simply follow these tools and produce great results with other people. But my hope, my intention, is that they blend it with their own personal experience. That if you were, a musician or an artist, I hope that you blend that with the way that you help other people. If you were a psychologist, or if you were even like a CEO or a leader, that perhaps you work with those types of people. I believe our past points at our medicine and what we're meant to offer to the world. And I think, part of the frustration that I've seen in the wellness space is this sort of homogenized version of what it means to walk a spiritual path. People go down, these paths of awakening and evolution and fall in love with self-growth. And they can kind of start to fall into these different cliques spiritually speaking, and almost pretend that they're not like this misfit that grew up in this small Midwest town, or that they didn't used to, listen to gangster rap and drink 40s in the woods with their friends. And this is parts work to me. Is like this radical level of authenticity and transparency of saying, I'm not going to erase my past. I'm not going to pretend that I came from somewhere else. I'm not going to pretend that I grew up in the mountains. I didn't grow up in an indigenous culture. I am, American, through my own personal experience. I can speak to that. I'm a millennial. I'm not going to pretend to be older than I am. And all of that, just self acceptance, I think it gives us a permission slip to bring more of our true selves into the spiritual space, because it's not meant to be just this one thing. In Austin, there's lots of people who are very fitness forward, very, very focused on physique and what they eat. And I love that for Austin. And so I see this blend of like wellness, shamanism, spirituality blended with, biohacking. And that's like a cool new iteration of how these ancient practices weave together with modern science, right? But if that's not your thing, if you came from a different place, if you went to college for something else, if you had passions when you were a little child, I'd hope that you would bring that in after you become spiritual and start walking down this path. I want to see more of that other life injected into the wellness sphere, so that we're not all just buying little Zen gardens to put on our desk and rake the sand, but like, I mean, I want it to be a little bit more punk rock. And I guess that creates some
Because it's
agitation.
not a mold and it's not a certification program. I mean, there are those, but that is not you did it. You're certified. Go out like it's a growth and iteration, and you pick up a drum one day and you're like, oh wow, this is cool. And yeah, art. I mean, there's so many. I love it. I totally resonate with that because I'm in that space now where I'm like creating my own thing. We are the medicine, right? It's these are all just tools in the medicine bag, but we have something. Our souls have something to bring forward. So I do love that. So I imagine your course, which is like 6 months long, or the not course, what do you call it, apprenticeship, or what's the right
Yeah,
word?
you can call it a course.
Okay.
It is a course.
Okay.
It's online. It's a hybrid course. So there's like pre-recorded materials and workbooks and homework assignments. But then we meet every single week, and I give presentations and demonstrations and Q&A and all that.
But I imagine you're pulling these gifts and medicines out of people or helping them find these special ways of what their medicine is, the artistry part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm stepping into my fourth year of doing it, and I find myself forcing myself to update the material each year, no matter how much of an undertaking that feels like. Because as I evolve, I want whatever I share with the world to evolve too. And I think that's a little bit of a warning for other facilitators and healers, is like, if you continue to do the same thing that, maybe used to work for the people that you serve, and you start to get bored, or you start phoning it in, or get a little disconnected, or you feel like you're just going through the motions, it's because it's meant to be this living entity. Like we talk about the medicine wheel, which is this map for evolving consciousness. It's a, rite of passage. But the medicine wheel is supposed to be alive. It's this living thing that we all feed. And so with whatever your offering is, if you feel called to get a new training and bring that in, sometimes that can re-inspire you, or something that seems like totally disconnected. Like you've always wanted to be a dancer, and so you start exploring dance. Okay, how do I weave dance in with my spiritual path? Or whatever it is, it makes a lot of sense to me that if you start to lose passion and you start to feel like you're doing this because you should, it's going to be felt. And And I will say for myself, I definitely started to get burned out years into this path. And I needed to take a break. I needed to take space. I got so burned out that I thought I didn't want to do this work anymore. But I felt so bound to it because of my commitment, because of these, even these rites of passage or initiations I received from these shamans, these journeys I went on. I started to get into almost an adversarial relationship with my spiritual path. Okay, this is too serious. I'm a pretty lighthearted guy. I want to have fun. Maybe I should just get a normal job. I know many people who are very successful in these types of fields that maybe a few times through the year they have these little identity crises where they're like, maybe I should assimilate. And the solution for me is I'm not bringing my full self into my spiritual work. I'm not really bringing my full self. There's still more space for me to make this more fun, more passionate, for me to honestly do the scary thing, which is to bring more of my own personal truth into these practices. Because it's scary, because then you're not hiding behind a certification or lineage. But what I've found is that it's less about the tools and modalities that we offer others and more about our presence, which is also something I hear you saying. Like who you are as a person, I think, speaks volumes. And sometimes people's desire to work with you is simply to have a permission slip for them to embody more of their truth.
Yeah, and inauthenticity is felt. No, we never get away with it. You can fool some people, but it doesn't stick, that's for sure. So we're called that. We have to evolve and change. We have to put ourselves in because it's felt, like you said, you're not getting away with it.
I wonder if maybe in the past you could have gotten away with it a little easier. I think I definitely can say for myself, I fell for it. When I was early on my path, picking up self-help books and in the New Age section at Barnes and Noble, where these teachers were
People
great.
aren't getting away with it to an extent, but the people who are attuned and now sensitive, like they're not getting away with us now, right?
Yeah, you mean like beginners on the path are, yeah, versus the level of discernment that comes in if you've been walking this path for a little while. I think
You're
it's
talking
also
about collectively, you think in general, we're not getting away with as much collectively, you think?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think with social media and I think we're waking up to, like you were mentioning, the prison system called school,
Yeah.
or the 9 to 5, or looking at healthcare and food systems and just the money. Like people, millennials and probably younger, are now like, wait, they're starting to question things. So maybe that's the collective not getting away with the inauthenticity.
Yeah, I think our bullshit meter is the best it's ever been, which also suggests that in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be even stronger. So if you want to be ahead of the curve, dare to expose yourself, warts and all, to the world. And also as a leader, I think we're breaking out of this old programming where we're not supposed to show too much of our own wounds. We're not supposed to show that we have our challenges, that we're not perfect, that we fall out of practice ourselves because, we're trying to lead people to a better life where they're taking better care of themselves. And I definitely fell into that. The feeling that I wasn't allowed to share all these other pieces of myself, that it would somehow invalidate my work. When what I found is, guess what? I have clients that I like more. The more I share my truth, the more I enjoy the people that are on the other side of these calls or in the spaces that I show up in, holding space for groups of people. Kind of that age of the guru being dead in a sense, which I also think is this borderline religious, sort of programming where our leaders, whether it's in a religious space or something else, would appear as a voice of God and that they were beyond sin, when really they just did a good job of hiding their sin, And then those things get exposed in really tumultuous ways and usually explode. So it's like, let people in enough and know that we are on this trajectory where you're probably going to have to let people in more and more because otherwise they can just get an AI therapist that pretends to be perfect, talks back to them. I just got a pitch through my DMs on Instagram of some company that asked, can we use your likeness to create like a AI shaman? I'm like, yeah, totally. That's great. That totally is in alignment with everything that I'm teaching.
At least they asked.
So this isn't even me right now. This is just my
Yeah.
avatar.
Oh my goodness. So we're getting to the end of our podcast and we've just scratched the surface. Is there something in 5 minutes? Can we tap into the medicine wheel at all? What the significance of that is, how people can study or learn more about that? It's to guide life. I know it's a bigger topic than 5 minutes, but is there some sort of, what is it? Where did it come from? How do we apply it in our life? And then if we can't cover all that, is there a book that you would recommend? Because the medicine wheel, I'm just being selfish right now because this is something I've dabbled in and I want to understand more. But it's a lot.
Yeah, I would say on a simple level, the medicine wheel is like a way of segmenting the hero's journey that we're all on, right? So we're all engaging with it in a sense. We're all at a different place on our path. Whether we're in the place of our healing journey where we're working on healing our history, so like the stories we tell ourselves about what happened to us, and the way to shift out of that is to start to tell the story from all the gifts that we gained through our pain. That would be in the south direction of the medicine wheel, which is symbolized by the serpent in this tradition. So shedding our past. And as I share these things, you may see where people in the wellness field get caught in these segments of the wheel without evolving into the next piece. In the west direction, it's a lot about shadow work, and it's about going through that death and rebirth. So the gift there is that we don't have to wait until our final transition. We don't have to wait until our body dies to experience the transformation of death. We can go through a rite of passage. We can create that ourselves. The key is to see where you are on your path right now. Do you need that? Do you need that peak experience? Do you need that rite of passage? Do you need that trip to Peru? Do you need program to go through that transformation? And also we need to look at our shadow, meaning the things that we are projecting upon others. And as we do that, a big piece is about the gifts, because in Western psychology, we focus on our deficiencies quite often. So we get stuck in the south and the west direction of the medicine wheel, constantly working on our stuff, constantly working on what's wrong, right? But in the north direction, it's symbolized by the hummingbird, which is the hummingbird drinks from the sweetest nectar of life. It also defies logic. It shouldn't be able to fly. It definitely shouldn't be able to fly over the oceans as it does when it migrates every year. I'm looking at a painting of a hummingbird above my screen right now. No amount of working on your shit is going to get you to utopia. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, you're going to have to start focusing on the gifts. And for me, I would have never healed from my chronic pain and my illness unless I started finding the gifts that were embedded in it. Wow, I have so much more compassion for other people who are struggling in this way. In a way that intellectually, sure, I could have developed more empathy, but it never would have hit in the way that it does now after struggling with that for years. So I'm so grateful for that gift. It gave me a sacred pause in my life from 17 to 22 to be out of commission, to check in with myself. What a gift that was. In those early parts of the wheel when I was stuck in victimhood, there were no gifts there. And when there are no gifts, there's no open door into the next chapter of your life. And then in the East direction is about embodying these wisdom teachings. It is very much about embodying the mess of all these different parts, of being a walking contradiction, of walking the spiritual path, but in this way of like being a full spectrum spiritual being, of, doing breath work and then maybe having a cigarette after and not hiding it out of shame. Going to your yoga retreat and then, driving through McDonald's, whatever your thing is, without the shame.
Okay, this has been one of my favorite conversations. You have so much like wisdom and knowledge, but it's also not that serious. So I love that. So I'm gonna wrap up our conversation, but I don't want to because I'm having a grand old time here. Where
Same
can
here.
people find, like, what's your website, first of all?
Rami Dreams. Rami Dreams is my website. It's also my Instagram page. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the best
Check me
place
out
for
there.
people to explore your course? You have a couple things like that Sunday, like a first Sunday of the
Yeah.
month
Very
gathering.
low barrier to entry, free / donation based, digital shamanic church, basically. I call it Sacred Sundays. It's an opportunity for us to create this bubble, to create ritual. So I wanted to remove all the excuse that, this doesn't exist in your town or that you don't have the funds. Like once a month, I show up first Sunday of the month. And I guide everybody on a shamanic journey to do really like a soul retrieval on themselves. And then they have a month to integrate that. And then every year I've been doing this medicine wheel program, School of Shamanic Artistry, energy medicine training. I got to stop changing the name on it, but that's,
I like it
it
now.
evolves.
Stick with that. That's a
Okay,
good
cool.
one.
Okay, cool. That will launch at the end of March,
Oh, beautiful.
and that
Okay.
goes for 6 months. And yeah, I've really stepped more into facilitation and teaching, rather than doing much on one-on-one work. So
I was just going to ask if you do one-on-one. But you have a little
I
baby and a
have a little
wife.
baby.
You're a
She's my
dad.
apprentice
Yeah, I love watching your pictures and stuff on Instagram. Super cute little family.
and my teacher. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm blessed. I'm grateful to be back in Austin. Um, yeah, and I'm really grateful to do this work. I think like I said, I fell into a place where I wasn't sure I wanted to continue. I needed to take that pause and definitely have come back with a lot more passion and presence. Yeah, and, a lot of people have these callings that have lived within them for years and they don't know what to do with it. And I would say like a big part of what I do is give permission to people to say a resounding and full yes to this commitment without needing it to lead to some specific career or identity. But so much healing happens when we stop resisting the calling that's always been stirring in our soul, whatever that is. And when we finally say yes to spirit, which usually comes with tons of uncertainty, but the process of going through that hero's journey, it really commences once we stop fighting against it.
Yeah. Ease. It's not always easy, but there's an ease to
Ease, baby. Yeah, it's not always easy. Oh, easy? No.
Not
If
easy,
you
but
want
there's an
easy,
ease when the
yeah.
doors fly open. You just have to step through, and stepping through is not always easy. But we're not here for easy. We're here to learn lessons. We're here to experience. We're here to find our gifts through struggle. And yeah, we don't want it to be easy. I don't think that would be very fun.
No, and sometimes pain is the price of admission.
Yeah. All right, Rami. Thank you so much for your time today. Maybe there will be a second interview one day. I think there's still a lot of wisdom to pull out of this guy.
Thank you. Much love. I'll come back if you invite me.
Awesome. All right. Enjoy your day.
You too.